today. So first of all, what is classification in machine learning for every beginner? Second, why are we actually learning this? What are the applications of such classification tasks? Thirdly, we'll be doing what are the different types of classification tasks. In general, many people just in different webinars, if you have attended, they would just touch upon different classification tasks and take the simplest most of classifying iris or some other thing and just move on. So I'll be rather talking about what are the challenges you actually face on an industrial level when we are talking about classification tasks, and with a special focus on imbalance classification, since that is the hardest classification detail in machine learning compared to others, and we'll be dealing with different techniques. I'll be explaining it. Of course, some techniques might go to an intermediate level. I won't deny that part, but I will try to keep it very lucid and simple. And of course, you're in free field to be interactive and post your doubts regarding it. So lastly, I'll be sharing some of a few resources, and we'll be concluding a session with a small announcement as well. So let's start with what is classification, right? So in our day-to-day lives, we are seeing different objects around us, and how we actually see different objects visually is through our eye, and our brain is sent a signal to actually identify that object. Now imagine that I am a computer. How do I perceive different objects around me? How do I perceive that yes, a particular pen kept under the table is a pen, or a particular apple is red in color, or a particular some other fruit is orange in color, for example, orange. So all these sort of problems come under a single category in machine learning, which is called classification. Now, if you just see classification as a broad perspective, it's like teaching a baby how to learn something, right? A baby might make mistakes in identifying some objects initially. For example, when I'm trying to teach a baby how to speak, he will identify some few letters of the alphabet, then try to make words, then try to speak. Or he can also identify a few patterns in terms of speech and try to speak directly without learning alphabet. So there are numerous ways in which the baby can learn. Now, your classification task is basically making a baby learn. In this case, the baby is the computer, and making them learn that how do you actually assign a label, which means how do you identify a particular object given a different objects in the scenario. For example, if I am having a table filled with fruits, how do I specifically identify that that table contains some apples out of all other fruits? So basically, as you can see in the figure, we need to identify instances and then assign labels that yes, this particular thing is a apple or probably is an orange. So on a very broad perspective level, if you see what is classification task, you can imagine that we have to basically construct a linear or a non-linear boundary to identify different objects. By a linear or non-linear boundary, I simply mean that I want to separate different labels and different identities of different objects and tell that probably yes, this particular set of objects belongs to a particular label, say class A, which is apples, and the green ones refers to a particular label called class B, which might be balls. So this is how a computer should ideally be able to, and today we will be learning how to automate this. That is the core essence of a machine learning algorithm, right? So why are we actually learning all this is a bigger question. So what are the different applications? So the first one is a very common application, which is an email spam filter, which you all see in day-to-day life. Whether a given mail is a spam or not spam, you can check your Gmail. They segregate it automatically based on different keywords which are present in the content of your mails to identify them as spam and then filter it out of your inboxes. Now that's a very generic identification of a classification task. Now, how do learning this probably gives me or yields profit to an organization, right? That is a bigger question on an industry level which we need to answer. So the second application, as you can see in the topmost figure, is the credit card fraud transactions, which we'll be working on code as well today on. And basically this problem is a very acute classification problem Why? Because it is imbalanced classification. By imbalance means that there are a very few number of fraud transactions compared to legitimate transactions in our daily lives, and therefore identifying them, those particular fraud transactions, which are a very few number among say 10 transactions out of 10,000 transactions, identify those particular transactions is a very difficult task for a computer automatically, right? But we need to learn how it actually happens. The third thing is an interesting application, as you can see in the fish image. It is something called customer churn. So this is a quite comparatively new application which Netflix came up. Like, I mean, everybody in the lockdown almost has some video premium services which they view, say Netflix or Amazon Prime. So these platforms really need to study whether a particular person might be subscribing or unsubscribing from their service, right? So a churn is basically a concept which measures quantitatively how many people might unsubscribe, not subscribe, unsubscribe from a platform. That means if I'm watching Netflix for 1 month, free trial, which everybody does, and then changes our identities as usual to go on to another free trial, what is the probability that probably I will be unsubscribing it in the next month and switch to Amazon Prime? That is something basically a user changes, or rather, as the fish image actually shows, a user actually leaves one organization and opts for another service. So this churn is a very driving motivation factor for an organization, right? They can measure how much losses they might gain. If I'm predicting that yes, Netflix might lose around 10,000 users by the end of September, I can probably try to increase my ad campaign budget in order to minimize that loss. So that is something these organizations try to get out of it. And how do they classify them is based on the entire recommendation system, which is a very diverse topic in machine learning as well. A very simple application in case of our day-to-day lives is the weather reports, which basically have 4 different categories. Okay, obviously there are many other categories. These are the major 4: a sunny day, a rainy day, a snowy day, or probably a thunderstorm. So in Bangalore, fortunately, you get to see all 4 in a single day. So that's a hard classification problem comparatively. But in other cities, it is pretty prominent since the weather is constant, and therefore it becomes an easier way to classify it. So these are a few application of classification so that you can get insight to why actually we are doing this, or how this is important industrially to some organizations so that they can get some profit out of it. So at the end of the day, we get to know that classification is basically a task in which computers need to automatically assign labels given a set of training input examples or instances that we call as input data format.